So my name is Petteri Vihervaara, working in Finnish Environment Institute as a research professor. I have been here since 2010 and almost same time have been engaged with the GeoPON network for pond development, biodiversity observation network development, co-lead of that working group. So quite long experiences from that network also. And recently, couple of last years, I've been involved in European Biodiversity Partnership on behalf of Ministry of Environment Finland, leading their one work package which is dedicated for biodiversity monitoring development across the Europe, so upscaling from national to European scale. I have altogether 90 slides, so a little bit too much. Some of them are muted, and then if we are getting too hurry, we can skip some of the slides and you will get the slides and presentation anyway afterwards if there's something you would like to see. First, I would like to also acknowledge Andrew Gonzalez, co-chair of the GeoPON, about some of the slides, what I got from him. Same for Camino Ligette from Joint Research Center, who has been actively developing a European Biodiversity Observation Coordination Center on behalf of Europapon Consortium. And then a couple of my colleagues from the Syke, Risto Heikkinen and Veera Norros, who prepared some slides about the modeling, which is their expertise in particularly in our Finnish Ecosystem Observatory final seminar, which we had last week or a couple of weeks ago in Helsinki. So more about that a little bit later. But that as an introduction. So this is the titles of my topic. First, a little bit background of these EBVs, especially with this Earth observation point of view. Then I'll give a short introduction for this global framework, CPD and GeoPON, GBIOS initiative as well. Then downscaling to the European Biodiversity Observation System, Europapon and Biodiversa Plus as the two key initiatives in Europe at the moment. And then finally also tell a little bit of our national effort in Finland, Finnish Ecosystem Observatory for Biodiversity Monitoring, but also modeling efforts. And then finally, that's maybe even more about the future, that how this kind of monitoring and biodiversity data could be then integrated with different models and support different modeling exercises. But let's start with these EBVs just to get an overview. So Essential Biodiversity Variables is a concept coming a decade ago. It was established because climate community was very successful harmonizing their measurements and then introducing harmonized metrics for their models and scenarios. So that's what biodiversity community has been trying to achieve during the last 10 years or even more. So there are so many ways how to measure biodiversity that's really the question, how to do and for what kind of biodiversity to focus, as you definitely are very well aware. So that's more or less the traditional way, in situ observations, experts in the field. But like this picture in Finnish Lapland, it's a huge area and it needs a lot of citizen science or trained expertise, and still you need to integrate your spotty observations to the different models and extrapolations to get a better understanding what's going on and repeat that over time. That's the same area from space, from the Sentinel satellites. So that's something what we are really trying to get more used nowadays in our institute, for example, for operational data products for Finland and for Europe to support biodiversity observations with this kind of maybe more traditional environmental data or remote sensing features and parameters which could then support biodiversity in situ observations and modeling as well. But coming to these EBVs, so I got enthusiastic about EBVs after reading Pereira's paper, because I think it was really something that was missing, and it gave a first good overview of different dimensions of biodiversity, suggesting like a key aspects of biodiversity which should be monitored in an ideal, perfect world. So covering genetic diversity, species populations, traits, communities, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem functions. Of course, that has been more like a concept for a long time, but how to make that real in practice, that's then another challenge for the community and for researchers, but also for more like environmental experts and authorities who are in charge of monitoring and reporting for different international agreements, for instance. This is just a snapshot from the same paper a decade ago, published in Science. Pereira et al. About how this EBV discussion gets started. So the main characters of these harmonized essential biodiversity variables is that they should be first biological, they should be state variable, they should be sensitive to change, ecosystem agnostic as far as possible, but also realistic to achieve, to really support monitoring and estimating the trends and changes in nature. That's another graph by Kiesling et al. About the idea how these raw observations are then cultivated through different steps to EBV usable datasets, EBV ready datasets, and then derived and modeled EBV data. For example, we have some kind of EBV data cube approaches. And then based on these harmonized data layers in space and time and different taxa, it's possible then maybe calculate some indicators also about the change in biodiversity. And that's then the point when it's reaching the society more and supporting information for different policy processes and decision making at different scales. Then another quite relevant topic for biodiversity monitoring is that there's plenty of novel methods available. Europapon project that is coming to the end at the moment in Europe, led by Pereira and colleagues also. They also try to achieve good overview what kind of novel methods is available for biodiversity monitoring at the moment, and they make this kind of TRL assessment for different methodologies or method types. And if I spot something here, you can see that, for example, remote sensing is quite numerous, and it's something that is quite major technique already. It has been available already like 20, 30 years, even longer. But still today they are, I would say that at the moment they are reaching the level of maturity and the easiness to use that they are really more and more relevant for the biodiversity and ecosystem research communities also, which are maybe not so trained for working with this kind of methods. Another thing which is quite often mentioned is this environmental DNA, eDNA, that's not so major yet, but it's coming up everywhere here and there, and there are really demand for standardizing these methodologies to make them useful for monitoring and getting harmonized observations and data. Then maybe a little bit highlighting these possibilities of remote sensing. So there was a paper a couple of years or some years ago by Andrew Skidmore and colleagues from GeoBon mostly, but also some other people, where in a few different workshops, people tried to achieve some kind of consensus of the available remote sensing products which are relevant for biodiversity, and then made some kind of prioritization for these products. And of course, as you can imagine, the ecosystem structure and function are definitely those EBV classes where these remote sensing applications are maybe the most promising ones in the future. This is the snapshot of the list out from the same paper, and here you can see some examples. So these were ranked with the relevance and the feasibility, and also the remote sensing status. And those which I just marked with the stars, the red ones, they are possible products indicating, for example, biodiversity change based on land use, for example, or some other things. And then the blue ones, which are maybe relevant for example, climate change modeling and monitoring of their impacts. With remote sensing, it's not a silver bullet. So there are a lot of challenges how it could be supporting biodiversity monitoring. This picture is from my colleagues, Saku Anttila et al. From our institute in our Finnish Ecosystem Observatory project. We were trying to really find ways how remote sensing could be applied for supporting biodiversity monitoring. And these three main categories were identified. So it's important to find ways how Earth observation could really support monitoring, to discuss with these traditional field inventorists and habitat experts to understand what kind of data products they would need for their purposes. Then collect the data what is relevant and provide that available. And then also it's important to pay attention for this processing, managing and sharing, especially if it's going to be operational long-term monitoring product, which hopefully supports science and monitoring over the times. So these issues were highlighted here. Then obligatory picture of different satellite products which are today available for biodiversity and ecosystem monitoring. On the left side, there are classes with the high spatial resolution or moderate spatial resolution or core spatial resolution. And then some examples like this more traditional multispectral satellite types, Landsats, Sentinels. More and more promises and expectations are towards hyperspectral satellites, which is having a lot of different bandwidths to get a better understanding of the different spectral characters of the land surface. And then there are also some LiDAR and radar products also available, which might provide some information for biodiversity monitoring as well. And this is a slide in a nutshell explaining what different satellite types, where they could be relevant for biodiversity point of view. So, for example, Sentinel-1, Planet 1 and 2, Planet and WorldView, they are important because of the higher spatial resolution that provides numerous new opportunities for ecological observations. Imaging spectroscopy, which reflects for these hyperspectral satellites, that's expected to be relevant for functional traits, functional diversity, spectral measures of vegetation diversity. Then LiDAR and radar, they could give three-dimensional information like a diversity of primary producers, canopy structure, vegetation height, density, but also soil moisture. And then also new some sensors which are covering multiband thermal or chlorophyll fluorescence images. They are relevant for plant ecosystem function, composition, and response to stress. And this is how the products look. So in Finland, we are very much using Sentinel-1 and 2 for our applications, and also national LiDAR data, which is repeated campaigns all over the country every few years, openly available for scientists and researchers. Remote sensing is also promising for assessing some of the ecosystem condition. So, for example, Hapamäe, a typical habitat type for northern Finland, which is needed to be reported for Habitat Directive every 6 years by our institute. So my colleagues were developing a method how Sentinel data could be used to really estimate these different wetness indexes and the condition of different Hapamäes, to use that as a data when reporting next time for the Commission. But there are definitely some challenges with this EBV approach. So data availability is a tricky issue always. Harmonization is really a main challenge across different steps, from observations to EBV usable data to EBV cubes. And then when it comes to this downstream use of EBVs, there's this mismatch maybe between some local or global EBV products. So if a product is global, it might be that it's not relevant or useful for local level decision makers, and vice versa. So how to make local products upscaled and comparable, that's always a discussion. Where we are especially focusing is this in situ data, remote sensing data, but then also more data on drivers and pressures and how these could be integrated, merged together to get better understanding of the ecosystem condition and the trends and changes in nature. Okay, then let's go to this global approach. So CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, is maybe the most important international agreement supporting and focusing for biodiversity issues. Last 2 rounds, it has been quite abstract. There hasn't been really measurable indicators, but now for this latest Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the new thing is that the indicators are really trying to also get real data and measurements about the phenomenon behind the indicator, which should be then reported by the parties of the convention and member states in that case. Also, there was a mention that during this next decade until 2030, there will emerge a national or regional entities like coordination hubs for biodiversity knowledge, but also a global one. And that's, of course, good for the biodiversity and for coordination of this kind of monitoring schemes. GeoBond has been quite active also nowadays when the Secretariat is located in Montreal, so there are direct connections to the CPD Secretariat as well. And both GeoBond and GPIF have been really trying to boost this approach and thinking for CPD and these negotiations that we really need to invest for better monitoring of the data. And the next slides are actually from Andy Gonzalez, who was visiting in our final seminar. So thanks for Andy about these slides. They are nice animations which make this very heavy presentation, but let's go through them. So I had a permit to show them for you also here. So basic idea is that the biodiversity observations should really guide policy and action from observations to the monitoring and reporting, and then, for example, providing information for GPF or IPBES or other assessments. And then this policy action should improve the state of the nature. But if you don't monitor the state of the nature, it's hard to say if you have succeeded with your policy processes or not. So what has been missing in the global system is that for climate community, there is IPCC having global climate observing system in place, while IPBES doesn't have similar for biodiversity. And that's one of the main spearhead projects at the moment with the GeoBond, that there's really a lot of trial to get this pushed through internationally to make this kind of new GBiosystem emerging. But how to do it, it's a challenge. So that's something what is definitely urgently needed to unite monitoring and support action. For example, there's going to be World Biodiversity Forum having a special workshop in June in Davos discussing about this, how this might become real. But let's see, fingers crossed. Good initiatives ongoing anyway. What this GBios could then include, it could cover observations from across the globe, international exchange of observations. It should also integrate global biodiversity models, and then coming down here to data processing, forecasting, warning and advisory products, and delivery of biodiversity services, including scenarios for actions. I think this might be interesting also for this ecological forecasting initiative experts and colleagues as well. And then finally, this, of course, should be steering decision-making processes and action. That's another of these Andy Gonzalez and GeoBond animations starting from 1980s about the GPIF data, what kind of data they have been accumulated during the few decades in the planet. And as you can see, there are some areas in North America and Europe where most of the observations are done, but still most of the planet is quite dark even after 30, even for almost 40 years of observations. So today's species records, they cover 7% of the world's surface at 5-kilometer resolution and less than 1% of the most taxa at higher resolutions. So what is the solution how to get this dark planet more colorful? The recommendation of this GBios idea is that there really should be emerging national biodiversity observation networks across the different countries, and it's quite straightforward that, for example, Ministry of Environment, who should be steering, monitoring, and reporting for CPD, for example, they should be part of the game to establish and to take care of this kind of establishment. But then it needs a wide community of different kind of experts, different taxa experts, habitat experts, technological expertise, really coordination of national networks to provide harmonized data available. And then hopefully when such networks are emerging, they have a global network and a global system how to analyze this data and make, for example, this EBV trends globally, regionally, or locally available. Okay, then let's come to the European scale, regional scale. What's going on in Europe? So there are two main initiatives at the moment, EuropaBond and Biodiversa. EuropaBond is a project which is coming to the end. It should have ended last year already, but they have a half-year prolongation, so final stakeholder event will be held 27-28 May in Brussels. And the Europapon has been really trying to develop this kind of top-down EU-scale monitoring observation system based on EBVs for Europe. And the acronym what they are suggesting as a main outcome is that there should be a EU Biodiversity Observation Coordination Center, EBOC, established in the coming years. Ops from directs. What Europapon has done during the last few years, they have been having a lot of stakeholder workshops. They have been revising a list of essential biodiversity variables and ended up for 84 different ones available from this GitHub link. And as you can see, they are trying to really cover terrestrial, freshwater, and marine realms. But the emphasis has been really on species populations, not so much on ecosystem structure, function, or a little bit for community composition. Genetic monitoring, genetic composition is still something which is mostly missing from the all monitoring schemes and landscapes. Then a few next slides are representing a little bit more of this ebook. So these are from Camino Liquet from Joint Research Center, European Commission, who also offered these slides to be shown for you also here. So this is quite brand new slides and the information available, but this Europapon final reports are presenting the same ones. But anyway, the main thing for European scale is that there are challenges for biodiversity monitoring, as you know, might expect. Data integration, data access, sustainable financing of the monitoring systems, and then the coverage are the main challenges. And when different stakeholders were asked, these harmonized indicators for biodiversity were really the top priority, what was a challenge seen by different monitoring experts across Europe. And also another thing of the map is that, as you can see, there are quite strict borders between different countries about the color describing the data availability. But of course, that's not the whole truth if you think about the nature and ecosystems, how they are switching over the areas. Another assessment from the Europapon consortium is going through different realms, terrestrial, freshwater, marine, and how data is available. And basically the idea is that the darker color, the better data is available across different dimensions. And still there is quite a lot of this kind of like pale colors or empty shells when it comes to the species traits or some rare taxa which are maybe not butterflies or mammals or birds, like fungi, lizards, arthropods, and so on. And also same for ecosystem structure and function, but also for community composition. So quite a lot of gaps in data still available. So the solution, what should be done is that there should be better coordination, integration, and enhanced data collection. And this consortium suggested that this EBOC's vision should be covering, they should cover enhanced coordination, cooperation, standardization of enhanced data gathering and data sharing, modeling of and using of the novel technologies, getting best out of them, and then also provide and support financially to make monitoring long-term, which is one of the major challenges, because many countries are really having a project-based funding for monitoring, and keeping long-term monitoring alive is a really challenge almost every country in Europe. And then finally, capacity building and stakeholder engagement should be also important part of this kind of EBOC's activities. So the mission should be that this EBOC should coordinate biodiversity-related monitoring efforts in Europe and establish a shared European biodiversity monitoring framework by supporting coordination between member states and assisting enhance and align existing monitoring schemes and developing novel technologies, integrating results of the monitoring schemes and implementing clear data flows, and also to really analyze the information at EU level to derive policy-relevant indicators for decision makers. Some prioritized tasks of this EBOC were indicated also: coordination and support functions where one of the categories, data collection, mobilizations, integration and sharing, was another category, and the third one was analysis and reporting to support stakeholders. And the first column is the most priority actions or tasks, and the second column is the second most relevant category of actions. But for example, to highlight some, so there's, for example, need for establish a data infrastructure and tools, really support data mobilization, integration, but also provide data, not only coordination, but also monitoring data itself, which is then more expensive than the coordination alone. And one of the key messages is that besides of this kind of European overall center, there should be every country having a similar kind of national biodiversity monitoring hub, having similar kind of functions, and making really this kind of network of the national, transnational monitoring schemes and experts to work together for this European monitoring landscape. That's the suggestion of the governance structure of the report. So what it could include, there could be main secretariats. There has been ideas that maybe European Environment Agency might be a potential good host for that, but that's not decided yet. It's still open question and under discussions. National biodiversity monitoring hubs should be members of this kind of governance structure, EU institutions and agencies, transnational NGOs, but also international and regional data infrastructures should have a key role as well. And in addition to them, maybe some thematic hubs are needed for some special taxa or special biodiversity monitoring elements. And then there should be executive general assembly covering these national and EU bodies, then some tactical collaborative roles of the general secretariat, and then operational roles of those people who are making the monitoring and making it happen. Okay, but that was then the EU viewpoint and the top-down European approach. Then another one, biodiversity, that's then bottom-up, more coming from the national level network and collaboration, which also aims to the same goal, to support and improve biodiversity monitoring across the Europe, but still also having this additional level of complexity of the national and the local scale. So there are also, on top of these EU demands, there's a lot of interest for biodiversity data on a national, subnational level at the moment. And that's even more complicated landscape when you downscale to this scale. So European Biodiversity Partnership, Biodiversity Plus, is a network which is trying to bring in these viewpoints. It has been started operations 21, and it's going to last until end of 28, 7 years altogether. Maybe you are familiar with this previously, that biodiversity has been already quite a long time over different EU frameworks supporting biodiversity-related funding based on this kind of model, that there have been national funding agencies and then EU funding together pooled and then investigated for different biodiversity-related research goals. That's still part of the biodiversity actions, but in addition to that, the number of partners were doubled, so that ministries of environment and environmental protection agencies were engaged and involved in this new Biodiversity Plus. So there's much more of this kind of concrete expertise and investment and a responsibility for biodiversity monitoring and a biodiversity policy implementation engaged in the new Biodiversity Plus, compared to the previous ones, which were basically just research funding. The budget is significant. That's also another quite key thing. So all these partners, 83 partners from 41 countries at the moment, they bring in their own money, like Ministry of Environment is reporting some few millions what they are using for biodiversity monitoring every year. And on top of that, that's pulled together, and European Commission gives 30% of funding to boost and support biodiversity monitoring actions and collaboration across this network. Part of that is going for research goals, of course, but part of that goes, about 1/3 of the whole budget is allocated for biodiversity monitoring development in Europe. That's how our work package structure looks like. So it's not a typical project, but it's quite big machine. Actually, there are 5 thematic work packages, and one of them is focusing for biodiversity monitoring development. And in this work package, we have different tasks focusing for biodiversity monitoring priority indicator development, harmonization of protocols, methods, and databases, then implementation of novel technologies, and also citizen science, and then demonstrating the use of biodiversity monitoring data. And all these different steps are then tried to be studied through different thematic pilots, what we are running a little bit later, more of them later. So the final aim is to build a national network of national biodiversity monitoring schemes for Europe for long term, which hopefully continues then after 28 when the partnership is over and a new one hopefully emerging. There are different points of action what we are doing. So guide and prioritize, provide new resources, support capacity building, and engage with other relevant initiatives, just to mention them quickly. Quite a lot of publications are available. If you go to biodiversity.eu web pages, you can find library, but also there's a biodiversity monitoring pages where you can scroll down and find the publications which are recently published over these 2.5 years what we have been now operating. And we are in close collaboration with this EPOC planning and the European consortium, and our model has been to really try to focus for these national hubs which are then supporting this EU hub EPOC development, so that we really try to engage national networks, national counterparts to pay attention and try to develop similar kind of structures to support this kind of data harvesting and the monitoring efforts across Europe. This is maybe not so scientific effort compared to the European approach. This is quite practical one coming what the ministries are funding and doing already, and that's quite often still by different policy actions. But the priorities where we are trying to pool our work, they are covered by these different 12 state variable kind of classes, where our partners are investing quite a lot of monitoring funding already at the moment, and we would like to fill the gaps and improve these and harmonize these different priorities to really provide long-term harmonized data to also feed in for these EPVs but also for science and research. Currently, we are running different pilots. So there's a first wave of pilot 2 years exercises focusing for invasive alien species, soil biodiversity, and then about the governance structure. Then a new ones started this year for rocky reef fish monitoring, birds, bats, and nocturnal insects, and the grasslands and wetland habitats. And then there's probably a third wave coming later. And in addition to that, a task force focusing for developing national tools to monitor different biodiversity monitoring programs across different countries. That's just the big picture. I think I will go over that because there's a lot of text, but the main point of the different phases of the operations of first 2 years, we are currently in years 3 and 4 extending collaboration, and then hopefully last 3 years we will achieve this kind of development of this scheme, that how pilots could be really extended for long-term monitoring schemes and what that might cost and who should be in charge of that, and all that in parallel with the current development of the EPOC for the next steps. Okay, then back to the Finland. I'm looking for my watch that we are running out of time soon and not yet in modeling part. So that's what we have done in Finland. Here is a big picture of the Finnish monitoring schemes. On top of the arrow, you can see different in situ monitoring, starting from the early of the last decade with the visibility depth of the Baltic Sea, national forest inventories, and different kind of natural research related monitoring schemes, and more biodiversity related monitoring schemes emerging during 70s, 80s, 90s. But without any coordination or steering what to monitor, they have been basically established because of the need. So there have been observations that something is happening with this taxa or this environment, and we should monitor, we should understand why there's so a lot of changes and what might be the human impact behind these changes. At the same time, more and more remote sensing has been available here on the lower part, and what we have tried now during this Finnish ecosystem observatory project to harmonize this picture and bring together these different streams and understanding of in situ and Earth observation possibilities, how to better provide monitoring data for Finland. It has been a 4 years project which just ended end of last month, end of April. So final seminar was organized a couple of weeks ago. That was a rather big project, 6.3 million euros. Besides of that, few spin-off projects supporting the similar themes. So we had a different cross-cutting themes: biodiversity, ecosystem processes. Not only biodiversity, we thought that it's important that this kind of climate change-related ecosystem processes are also covered in this kind of national system and scheme. We had a special focus for management of data interoperability, modernizing biodiversity monitoring methods, and then integrating knowledge for decision-making at various scales. We had a good start. Science magazine was making an article about getting big picture of biodiversity by satellites and remote sensing tools, and they also interviewed us. So we had a good visibility for our project since the beginning. And of course, it has been in close collaboration with GeoBon and the experts there, exchange ideas and develop content of the project. And the EBVs are also reflected here in this paper as key classes, how they could be studied by satellites. But anyway, we try to bring together different data types, establish this kind of machine which provides data or raw data for researchers and experts who are more talented with the raw data applications and modeling, and then also a little bit more cultivated process data, such as indicators for wider society to educate and support media, schools, different kind of societal decision-making purposes, and demonstrated these use cases through different pilots. Work package structures are always boring, but anyway, just to mention here on the bottom are those 3 different data type work packages, and then through this interoperable data information system, we try to get this data available and demonstrate the use for different cases. And also the societal discussion was an important part of the topic, of course, as well. I just mentioned briefly these 3 data-related work packages, what we did in the Institute data work package. So we were especially focusing for molecular monitoring methods development and establish a national eDNA roadmap for Finland. Then we surveyed the situation, status, and recommendations for all national species monitoring schemes, which was quite surprisingly big number also for us. Altogether, 86 different monitoring schemes for different taxa were running in Finland. We also digitized old habitat type inventories for Myers and Groves, for example, and reported changes in carbon concentration balances and supported national ELTER network development. Then remote sensing work package, that was a special attention. So first, this user needs assessment was quite crucial to understand what is needed by experts and the biodiversity monitoring communities. After that, different workflow descriptions were made for different satellite data or other airborne UAV data. And more than 30 new remote sensing data products were published, which are then available through our new systems. But in addition to that, we also paid attention for some new applied research, like using AI deep learning for detecting rare tree species or dead wood in forests, or quantifying this ecosystem condition of upper Myers for Finland. Then going to the modeling part. So species distribution model predictions were, of course, the standard way of modeling, and we tried to get a big picture what kind of models there are available for biodiversity community in Finland, which might be relevant to cultivate and improve the understanding based on the data and observations. For example, drone data as an environmental data to integrate for species distribution models for the tested. Then there was some modeling exercises with greenhouse gas balance and also forest management measurements, process-based PREPAS model describing forest growth and carbon balance. And then finally, spatial prioritization models like zonation, which has been very much used in Finland, how that could be steering also conservation and sustainable decision-making, land use management, for example. One of the main outcomes of the project was this Finnish Nature Information Hub, which has 3 sections. First one is the data search with the metadata descriptions from 3 different institutes, Syke, Luke, and Luomus data, for example. And then we have a section which covers an overview of all Finnish biodiversity monitoring activities at the moment for species, habitats, and ecosystem process monitoring. And then we have a Nature Now section, which provides more like a data products like indicators or assessments or reporting for directives and so on, that kind of information from that section. And that's also kind of like a national solution then for this European picture. We established during the project a national network of 17 organizations which are either providing or using nature data, and that's hopefully the work that continues over the next decade, improving this biodiversity monitoring in Finland. We really think that with this good monitoring data and open data sharing, that has also significant support for science. So if the data is available, it could be better used than for new breakthroughs or testing novel methods or understanding better what's going on with trades or communities, how they respond for drivers of ecosystem functioning, or these detection attribution of drivers and pressures. Okay, then for the last part, and now this is the weak part because I'm not so expert of that, but I just have nice slides from my colleagues Risto and Vera, so maybe I go very quickly through this as we are almost over time already. And if there are questions related to this section, I recommend that I can maybe forward some of the questions to my colleagues to answer. But anyway, that's very important that how we then use the available biodiversity data for models and science. So this is just a brief note from the EcoCode workshop last year that we need outcomes were that we need multiple models for same question. There's often scale mismatch between projections and management, and there's a need of model-based indicators. So a lot of models, each with their own benefits and limitations. And then there are 4 different examples given by my colleagues. So first one is the traditional one of the species distribution models supporting conservation assessment and planning, like MaxEnt. There's a case study of the Finnish birds community. But if I go straight for these outcomes, because the lack of the time, so positive things of this kind of models is that they have information for species data gaps. They have impacts of they can have impacts of changing land use that can be assessed, and they can handle process-only data, while the limitations are that there are spatial biases in species data, wall-to-wall data, key environmental drivers is uncommon, and between species model comparison is tricky. Then Risto presented another approach, like a more for climate change impact on species. This model ensembles like links to habitat and population dynamics, the projections from species climate impact models, which may differ, single model uncertainty controlled by ensemble modeling, and they can be also used for some different predictive variables as well. And outcomes of this kind of model ensemble approaches and their links to habitats, Risto summarized like this, that there are positive things. They support targeting conservation to continued and new focal areas. And 2, they detect areas where model outputs agree or disagree. Limitations are that the broad-scale models, they ignore variation in topo and microclimate. And also there's limited estimates for species dispersal and population persistence. Then the third group examples is more coming from meta population dynamics and population dynamics in general, like a spatially explicit dynamic species population model range shifter to assess population persistence in climatically suitable areas, and with some butterfly as an example species. And based on that assessment, the pros of this kind of approach is that measurements of population persistence is differently fragmented. In differently fragmented landscapes can be modeled. Impacts of key species, life history traits, and environmental stochasticity can be modeled, and then determining habitat restoration needs can be informed. Limitations are that they are very data-hungry methods, and gaps in species trait data are still available. Then the fourth category and the last one are these species interaction modeling of the species communities approaches, like hierarchical model of species communities, HMSC, joint species distribution models, which my colleague Veera Noros has been particularly focusing to understand species level responses and to environmental factors, but also community level environmental responses. They are not independent, but depend on traits and phylogenetic relatedness. And species associations, there can be shared responses to latent factors. Veera has been involved in this kind of project where Baltic Sea plankton communities were studied under different scenarios, another focusing for more land use driver pressure for nutrient loads, and another of the climatic scenarios and how these different scenarios affect for different plankton communities. And that's how she has been using this joint species distribution approach together with these two different kind of pressure scenarios, another local one and another more like a global and large scale. And then interesting thing is that when there's a good community-based plankton data available, there can be quite nice patterns observed how these different kind of pressures are actually affecting these plankton communities in this Baltic Sea area, and how that could be then taken into account for supporting the nature or trying to decrease the negative impact of these pressures. Upsides are that this is a comprehensive framework. It combines information for all species, phylogenetic traits, and special temporal context to help disentangle underlying ecological processes. And it also includes rare species predictions, improves them. But limitations are that mixing species associations with unmeasured environmental variables, and computationally they are heavy, but there are new high-performance computing versions available. Then coming back to the remote sensing, so we need integration of these different data types together to feed in information for models, and that's maybe the latest goal at the moment, that we really try to cover these observations and EBVs for this detection attribution framework to understand better how the changes in nature are affected by different human-based pressures, for instance. Again, a slide from the Andy about that. It's important to pay attention for the scale, but also for drivers, and then, of course, get observations which can be used for this kind of modeling frameworks, and then use these for model the trends across the different scales. And that's something what we are trying to achieve in this new project, what was just started, Obsession, in the beginning of this year with the project. We try to really bring together these remote sensing-based biodiversity products and develop EBVs for ecosystem structure function, and then try to integrate them for detection attribution modeling framework. But maybe more about that later. So that's it. Quite heavy load, a lot of things. To summarize, biodiversity monitoring is urgent challenge. Data is needed across the society. This coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, it really calls for establishing global and regional coordination entities to improve biodiversity knowledge. GeoBond aims to develop GBios, building on national bonds and EBVs. Europabond is designing EBOC and defined for 84 the EBVs to harmonize monitoring in Europe. Biodiversity Plus aims to develop national biodiversity monitoring hubs, and Finnish Ecosystem Observatory is a national bond integrates remote sensing into and models. And then more thematic ones, that besides of the monitoring, we really need to pay attention for this detection attribution models to understand direct, indirect pressures of human impact on nature. Remote sensing has transformed monitoring, and there's a lot of possibilities. especially for structural, compositional, functional measurements of ecosystems. Long-term time series of Earth observations, they're crucial, but we also need long-term institute data, and various data is needed. Hyperspectral is really expected to be a game changer for biodiversity monitoring and biodiversity science, especially related to ecosystem functioning, how we understand and how we can monitor and measure that. And then finally, remote sensing enabled biodiversity products for ecosystem-related EBVs are very much needed because the current focus has been more on this in situ and species-related EBVs. That's it. Thanks for your attention, and hopefully we still have time for a couple of small questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Petteri. It was a really fantastic talk, a great overview of all the research really globally and in Europe on biodiversity modeling. So I really enjoyed it. I think so that the audience getting a lot of claps. We do have time for questions, and we can also go a bit over time for those who want to stay. And I don't know if you're available for a few more minutes after two.
Yeah,
so
sure. Yeah.
Go ahead. Who wants to start? Yes, Istem.
Thanks for the great presentation. I just have a technical question about this EBOC, how its funding scheme is envisioned. Is it going to be like member states are going to pay for its funding? Maybe I missed it.
Yeah, that's a good question. This European consortium, they have made estimations. I think they're publishing that next week, something like that. So, but they estimated that the coordination needs like 120 million euros for Europe to host and establish this kind of center. But then when it comes for this really monitoring and gathering the data, that's like a 2 order of magnitude bigger bill. And it's still question mark who is how to get that money. And for example, what EA is recommended, that it really should be part of the EU budget line, like a Copernicus services, something like that, to make it really provide a EU-wide new biodiversity data and observations. So it's good question. What is confirmed is that there's gonna be 2 more years preparation for this epoch. So European Parliament has given small funding so that this project can continue, and European ideas are hopefully then getting more major format. Maybe there's gonna be a recommendation that who is hosting this kind of center and how it's gonna be then really run in the future.
Okay,
quite a lot going on at the moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, exciting development.
And then next question from Mikhail Sofiev.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Petteri. Amazing, eye-opening presentation. I'm from Finnish Meteorological Institute, so I'm a little bit a bystander in that sense and haven't been involved in biodiversity monitoring. So I have a maybe provocative question. So you mentioned plenty of ways to monitor biodiversity. What about measuring it in the atmosphere, which is a perfect mixture, regional, local, and sampling methods are pretty good nowadays. eDNA, you mentioned, that's one of ways. There are bioaerosol monitors nowadays. Quite a few species can be recognized down to species level, kingdom if we are unlucky. So what about this? Can you comment on this way of partial biodiversity monitoring? Of course, not everything goes into the atmosphere, but quite a few.
Yeah, I think it's very promising, and as we have some collaboration through Vera and the Sport Life project, so we are of course very much interested in that as well. But yeah, we think that there's a lot of good progress for water diluted eDNA and the standardization of this kind of like a water sample observations, and maybe for air it could be a bit similar, so that air is also getting eDNA from all these different kind of organisms like spores or fungi, for example, or what. So you name it. So I think there's a lot of potential, but the challenge is then that how to model how this. You really need this kind of understanding of the climatic models and what is the distribution range of these different spores or eDNA, what you are measuring, and definitely not so high level of TRL at the moment, but the promising one, and hopefully in the next decade it's going to be also one of the standard methods for like a operational monitoring also. I really hope for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I did not know that one can get eDNA from the atmosphere. So definitely just learned something. That's very fascinating. Okay.
I'll put a reference to the chat within a minute or two.
Yes, please. That really, really interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's possible.
Questions?
It's challenging,
Yeah.
but it's possible.
But wow, okay. Are there any more questions? While we're waiting, I'm sure something will pop up. I have a question myself. So anytime I'm sort of get in contact with the GeoBon and Europebon and at the national level, even the Biodiversa. So I always wonder, is the goal then to sort of establish new biodiversity monitoring that's basically standardized across different countries, and basically, or is the goal to leech on or to benefit basically from already established monitoring schemes, right? Or both, or because there are so many monitoring going on already, and is there maybe also the goal then to further support those so you can maintain them long term? What is the balance there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would say maybe the realism is going to be some kind of mixed approach. So Europebon has quite started from a blank table that they really have tried to invent what would be the perfect system to make these observations. Maybe some of them is already collected, but there are definitely gaps. So how to fill the gaps, what is the optimal sampling design to get this information, but that's of course expensive. And if there's not going to be EU or some big money available for that, I don't know how it's going to be happening. While the biodiversa approach is maybe a bit more based on this kind of practical views of the national authorities, that there's quite a lot going on in many countries already.
Yeah,
it's maybe the challenge then is that they are very diverse and there are different sampling setups, and you really need to harmonize these data products at certain level to make them comparable. And it's maybe not that perfect, but it's better than nothing. So quite a lot can be do already for available data to harmonize that for comparable products. But maybe some kind of mixed system would be the best one, so that there are some of these true gaps where you start from the scratch and you really try to establish something new, while there where you have a good community and traditions, you just keep what is available and try to get better data products out of that, for example, with support of the models, for instance. So
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. That actually makes sense. Yeah, to start new where there's no data whatsoever. Yeah.
And some of the countries, they are quite hesitant to change their long-term traditional systems. Like France, they have tens of different monitoring schemes which they have been running over decades, and they say quite strictly that they are not going to stop that. They continue with that. But if there are some gaps detected, maybe we can then try to fill them. The different countries are in different situations. Some countries doesn't have any monitoring in place yet, so they are maybe more open-minded for establishing something totally new approaches as well to get at least some information. So.
Okay, thank you. Time for one last question. Yes, Istem.
Yeah, maybe I can follow up again along the same lines. And you said that your modeling colleagues, maybe we should invite them for further discussion. And I think the efforts so far is mostly focused on like rescuing data, making the data interoperable. But what is your take on the status of modeling and its role in integration, the existing data? Are these models, efficiently integrating the existing data at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's really necessity. So it's important. Maybe even in our approach, that has been a little bit more smaller emphasis what it should have been during, for example, this FAIR project. But hopefully in the future there will be more possibilities, and this EFI network looks really promising. So we are really keen on continuing discussions how we can maybe contribute for that. Especially, I think that I've been interested in this kind of like community EBV approaches, if this kind of joint species distribution modeling could be maybe providing some more comprehensive information of the species changes than like just one species distribution models or something like that, which might be useful as well for land use management. For example, if you can develop one species models which have a low uncertainties, it's useful for land use planners, for example. But when you have this kind of community change, you maybe are able to detect more different kind of pressures and changes or reasons behind this changes, what you might be then able to observe, which are maybe more related for traits, for example. So I think there's a lot of possibilities, and the modeling is the only way to really get this kind of understanding from the data. And in that sense, these approaches like aDNA or water DNA or some kind of like big campaigns like Life Plan Project, for example, they can really provide information which is then hopefully providing more information also in the future of the biodiversity in general. So very promising, and I think it's good that there are good modeling experts available and engaged in these processes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And if there are any more questions popping up or any ideas, so I'm happy to answer. You can always contact by email, for instance.
Okay, so with this, thank you very much, Petteri. Again, it was a really pleasure having you, and thank you everyone for joining us.